My name is Margaret Louise Bennett. I am 63 years old, and I was born in Asheville, a quiet town in the heart of North Carolina. I have been known as a woman of faith all my life. I grew up attending the same Baptist church where I later became a Bible study leader, worship leader, and a spiritual counselor to many. People admired me. I was the woman everyone came to when they needed prayer, always ready with a word from God, always smiling, always involved in church activities. They called me the Rock, solid, firm, unshakable, and I believed it. Early in the morning, before the sun rose, I would have my Bible open and a cup of hot tea in my hands. I would read the Psalms aloud, pray long intercessory prayers, and jot down verses with colored pens in my notebook. I would participate in fasting campaigns, make anonymous donations, and visit hospitals. The community saw me as a living saint, and perhaps I myself began to believe that too. But there is a big difference between being known as a Christian and actually knowing Christ. I didn't know that yet, and what came next would change everything. All. By the way, if you've made it this far, it's because something in this story touched your heart. So do the following. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for me, but so that more people can hear what I'm about to tell. Because, believe me, it could save lives. The routine I led was almost impeccable in the eyes of those who saw it from the outside. On Mondays and Wednesdays, I led a Bible study group in the church's adjoining hall. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I visited homes for the elderly and delivered food baskets. On Friday nights, I prayed with a group of sisters for the city, for the youth, and for the missionaries. On Sundays, of course, I was always at the pulpit, wearing a flowery dress, a serene smile, and an open Bible, ready to share the word of the week. My children called me a woman of God. My grandchildren called me Blessed Grandma. My pastor often cited me as an example in his sermons. I liked that. A lot. Maybe too much. Over time, I realized that I was nourished by that recognition. When someone cried after I prayed, my heart warmed, but not with compassion. It was a different feeling. Pride, perhaps. It was subtle, hidden behind the spiritual language that I had learned to master over time. The truth is, I had become excellent at appearing like a perfect Christian. I knew what to say, how to say it, and when to say it. I knew how to make others feel small and outside of God's will without raising my voice, just with a look or a well-placed biblical phrase. And I thought that was zeal. I thought I was being a warrior of faith. I thought I was serving. But deep down, something inside me was dying. An emptiness that the meetings, the prayers, the praises, and the applause couldn't fill. And I ignored it. I said, "It's just tiredness. It's just the weight of the ministry. It's just the enemy trying to distract me." It wasn't. It was God trying to show me that I was far away, very far away. And I would only find this out on the day I died. Sunday, 7:45 a.m. The sun had barely touched the Asheville hills when I put on my blue dress, my favorite for church. I adjusted the gold brooch on my chest, sprayed myself with lavender perfume, and held my Bible as I always did, against my chest, like a shield. At church, I was greeted with hugs, smiles, and that quiet respect that for years I had mistaken for holiness. The music began, and I sang along. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I closed my eyes, raised my hands, and felt that familiar emotion wash over me. The hall was packed. The pastor smiled at me from the pulpit. I felt right in the right place. But that morning, something was strange. Halfway through the second hymn, I felt a strange pressure in my chest, as if someone had placed a huge weight on me. I tried to ignore it. I took a deep breath, kept singing, but then the pain came. Sudden, sharp, like a blade piercing my body. My vision blurred. My legs gave out. I dropped the Bible, and it fell to the floor with a loud thud. A few people around me noticed. I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't respond. The last thing I heard was a scream from one of the sisters. "Someone call an ambulance!" I collapsed right there in front of the altar. Meanwhile, my mind seemed to float somewhere else. I saw everything from above. My fallen body, the people kneeling around me, the pastor trying to stay calm as they called the paramedics. I heard the prayers, the cries, the screams, and at the same time, I felt a strange peace, a lightness. I was dying, and I knew it. A nurse ran to me, already with the equipment in hand. They tried to revive me. Once, twice, 3 times. The defibrillator cut the air with a dry sound, but I felt nothing. Soon after, I heard words I never imagined would be said about me. Time of death, 9:13 a.m. It was as if time stopped. I always imagined that if one day I died in the temple of the Lord, He would welcome me with a celebration. Angels singing, heavenly doors opening, Jesus embracing me as a faithful daughter. But that's not what happened. At that moment, my spirit began to loosen. I saw the light, a glow in the distance, warm and welcoming. I was drawn to it. There was no pain. There was no fear. Just a sense that I would finally go to the place I had preached for so many years. I was convinced I would hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant." But what I would hear would be the opposite, the complete opposite. And that would break me in a way nothing else in the world could. I felt light, as if I had been detached from time, space, and pain. My body remained there, motionless in the hands of the rescuers. But my consciousness, my soul, was moving in another direction. I floated, gently, above the church pews, the desperate faces, the ambulance that was already arriving. It was like flying without wings. No fear, no anxiety, just an absolute certainty. I'm going home. I passed through a tunnel of shadows and lights. Everything around me seemed alive, pulsating in harmony. There was distant music, of a beauty that cannot be translated into human words. It was as if each note contained a piece of eternity. A bright light appeared before me, not like a lamp, but like a presence, a conscious light. The light seemed to know everything about me, every detail of my life, every unspoken thought, every gesture hidden behind my image as an exemplary Christian. As I approached, I became aware of others, shapes of light, some close, some far away, like stars in the sky. I sensed they were souls, beings, perhaps angels, but they all bowed in reverence to that central presence that now dominated my field of vision. Suddenly, the light thickened. It became form, and I understood. It was Him, Jesus. No painting, sculpture, or sermon could ever describe what I saw. There was fire in His eyes. There was mercy in His face. But there was also truth, pure, relentless. Nothing escaped that gaze. No mask could resist. I fell to my knees, or at least that's what it felt like. My entire soul bowed, not in fear, but in recognition. I stood before the King, the Lamb, the Alpha and the Omega, and inside me, there was a single expectation, hearing His voice saying that I was His, that everything I did, all the effort, all the prayers, all the years of serving, were not in vain. He looked at me, direct, deep, and then, with a voice that seemed to echo through the ends of eternity, He said, "Get away from me. I never knew you." Time froze. My being broke into 1,000 pieces. I tried to talk. I tried to argue. I tried to say that I was that woman from church, that I led studies, that I prayed for the sick, that I taught children, but nothing came out of my mouth, because in that moment, I knew. Everything I did was for me, for image, for recognition, for position. I preached about Jesus, but I never really knew Him. I never loved Him for who He is, only for what He could give me. And He, with a pained countenance, as if mourning a loss, repeated, "I never knew you." I felt something pulling me, a swirl of shadows. The peace began to fade. The light was receding. I screamed inside. I tried to hold on to something, anything, but it was too late. I wasn't going to heaven. I was falling. And that was just the first drop of hell. The fall was not physical. It was existential. I was falling apart inside. It was as if all the certainties I had built up throughout my life, all the truths I had preached, the doctrines I had defended, the verses I had memorized, were shattering like fine glass upon touching the ground of eternity. Everything went dark, but in the center of the darkness, he was still there. Jesus. Not like the gentle shepherd of my old paintings, nor like the man in the white robe in the children's stories, but like the just judge, the Son of the living God, sovereign, holy, incorruptible. He looked at me again. There was no hate, there was no screaming, but there was a pain that can only be seen in the eyes of someone who has loved and not been loved back. And then he spoke, not in anger, but with a firmness that pierced my soul. You used my name, but you never sought my heart. Those words tore at me, because they were true, because deep down, I knew. I quoted verses accurately, but I never truly surrendered. I taught forgiveness, but I held grudges. I called for holiness, but I hid judgments behind disguised smiles. He started showing me scenes from my life, places where I spoke for God, but hurt people with my pride. Times when I used the Bible as a sword to cut, and not as a bridge to heal. Prayers I said in public with fake tears. Advice I gave without love. And cruelest of all, the number of times I heard his voice calling me to intimacy, and I chose the stage instead of the secret. I cried. I cried. I tried to touch him, but my hands were passing through thin air. It was like trying to hold someone in a dream that escapes. I was at the door, and you never let me in, he said. You have done a lot for me, but you have not lived with me. At that moment, I found myself faced with the greatest truth of eternity. You can spend your entire life inside the church and still be completely outside of God's heart. It wasn't about religion. It was about relationships. It wasn't about looks. It was about surrender. And it was there, at the deepest point of revelation, that something changed. A whisper, a memory, a possibility. What if there was still a chance to go back? I didn't know. But if you're watching this right now, I have to ask you, comment below, what this moment made you feel. Sometimes transformation begins when we have the courage to write the truth that we have never said out loud. Maybe your comment isn't just a rant, but the beginning of a reunion. I was silent. That divine presence, holy, majestic, undeniable, surrounded me on all sides. Yet it seemed so far away. I wanted to run to him, throw myself at his feet, beg for mercy. But my feet wouldn't move. My lips wouldn't form words. Time here wasn't like time on earth. It was eternal and instantaneous at the same time. It was then that everything around began to change. As if invisible screens appeared around me, scenes from my life began to flash by. One by one, clear, detailed, unquestionable. The first one, me, at 28 years old, comforting a sister from church who had lost her job. I smiled. I prayed for her. But inside, I felt superior. She is reaping what she sowed, I thought. And Jesus looked at me, sadly. Then, another scene. Me leading a group of women. My voice was firm, full of verses. But there, in the secret of my heart, I judged each one of them. Their clothes, their stories, their weaknesses. I didn't see daughters of God. I saw defects. Another one. Me in the hospital, praying for a sick person. With my hands raised, words rehearsed, emotion forced. When I left the room, my first concern was to tell others how God used me. Scenes, and more scenes. Each one was like a stab in the soul, because now I saw everything with the eyes of truth. And the truth was hard. I was never who people thought I was. And worse, I was never who I thought I was. My faith was a well-constructed facade, decorated with verses, songs, and events. But the inside was empty. You loved the feeling of being used by God, but you didn't love me, he said. And his voice was like a mirror showing me the face I never wanted to see. It was at that moment that I realized something terrible. Hell is not just a place of flames. Hell begins when you realize that you lived your whole life believing you were saved, but you were lost. And the worst punishment is knowing that you had every chance. I screamed, not with my mouth, but with my soul. A silent, desperate scream, like someone who sees the light go out for the last time. Lord, please, give me a second chance." The silence that followed my cry was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't a calm, serene silence. It was a deafening emptiness, as if the entire sky had receded, as if eternity itself held its breath, waiting. But there was no answer, no voice, no light, no heat. Jesus' presence, once intense, full of truth and pain, now withdrew. I felt as if he were pulling away, not out of cruelty, but out of justice. He could not unite with someone who had spent his entire life rejecting his essence, even when he used his name. It was then that the ground, or what seemed to be the ground, began to open up beneath my feet. An invisible crack was pulling me down, not with hands, not with force, but with a weight, the weight of everything I had been. The fall has begun. It was an endless descent. No walls, no direction. I was moving in free fall, through a darkness that seemed alive. There was no physical pain, no screaming, only an absolute awareness of being separated from the source of all light. But the worst was yet to come. As I fell, I began to hear voices, screams, moans. They were like echoes woven into a chorus of agony. They weren't words. They were raw emotions. Regret, shame, despair. Millions of souls trapped in their own inner labyrinths, reliving their choices. People who, like me, thought they were right, who thought it was enough to appear righteous, who thought God understands, and He understands, but He is also holy. I tried to close my ears. I screamed. I cried. I struggled in a body that was no longer a body. The pain I felt was not in my bones or flesh. It was in my soul. The awareness of being lost. For real. Forever. The worst part? I felt like I deserved it. I knew I had chances. I knew how many times the Holy Spirit had tried to touch me. In worship, in songs, in quiet moments. How many times He had called me to the secret room, and I had chosen the microphone instead. As I fell, images of my life kept coming back to me. Not as before, on clean, clear screens, but as distorted, broken memories, like shattered mirrors. Every face I had wounded with spiritual words, every empty prayer, every act disguised as love, now came back as an accusation. There was no more time. There was no more body to fast. There was no more altar to throw oneself on. There were no more friends to ask forgiveness from. There was no more tomorrow. It was just me, and the choices I made. And then, deep in the darkness, I felt something different. A presence. Not like before. Not glorious, but intense. Something was approaching. It was as if, at the bottom of the abyss, someone was waiting for me. And I knew. I knew this was the next level. I knew the fall wasn't over yet. I knew that if I crossed that point, there would be no turning back. And it was there, on the edge between the abyss and oblivion, that something inside me screamed with a force I had never used before. Jesus, if I still have breath left, give me one more chance. My cry pierced the void like a spark in the fog. I didn't know if anyone heard me. I didn't know if there was still a way back. But even in the darkness, I screamed. Not with rehearsed words, not with memorized biblical phrases. It was a naked, raw scream, desperate. Jesus, I know I don't deserve it, but if I still have breath, give me one more chance. It was the first time in my entire life that I spoke to Him without a character. No titles, no pride, no trying to appear righteous, just a broken soul crying out for mercy. For a moment, everything stopped. The voices stopped. The darkness grew still, as if listening. Time bent. And there, in that tense silence, I felt something different. A breeze. Not on my face, because I no longer had a face, but in my essence. Something soft, sacred, familiar. It was as if He was listening. My heart, or what was left of it, trembled. Not with fear, but with hope. A tiny spark, barely perceptible, but alive. For the first time since my fall, I believed that maybe it wasn't the end yet. And then, something started to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a faint light began to form in the distance. It was weak. It didn't shine like before. but it was real, and it seemed to call to me. Lord, if you let me come back, I promise, I will live differently. I don't want a stage or a position anymore. I don't want to be admired anymore. I just want to know you. For real. I just want to be yours, as I should have been from the beginning. My words came out with pain, as if each one ripped away a layer of the old Margaret. But they were true, and in that place where everything is exposed, only the truth remains. The light began to grow, and with it, a warmth, a feeling that something bigger than me was about to happen. But there was also resistance. Forces around me tried to hold me back, cries of condemnation, voices that said, "It's too late now. You had your chance. There's no going back." And that was what they wanted me to believe, that grace had a limit, that the cross was only for those who died in peace, that hypocrites like me were unforgivable. But his blood was greater than all those voices. Suddenly, I was overcome by a force that was not mine. A light enveloped me completely. It was warm, strong, alive, as if heaven itself was going to war for me. The feeling was indescribable. And then I heard a voice, not from outside, but from within. A firm voice, but full of tenderness. It was not an accusation, it was authority. It said, "It's not the end yet." And the next moment, everything went black. But it was no longer the abyss. It was another place, cold, bright, real. And I heard human voices, devices, running. I was coming back. The first thing I felt was the cold, not a spiritual cold, like the cold of the abyss, but physical, real, icy, the kind of cold that burns through your skin and goes right through your bones. Then came the white light, blinding, harsh, like hospital fluorescence. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt glued together. I tried to breathe, and it was like swallowing stones. Thick, harsh air forced its way into my lungs, and then the scream, not mine, from someone close to me. "She moved! My God! She's alive!" Voices mingled together. Screams, hurried footsteps, metal objects falling to the ground, internal sirens, alarms, people running. The Asheville City morgue became a battlefield of shock and disbelief. I was lying on a steel gurney. A white sheet covered half of my face. My body had already been prepared for autopsy. The machines were turned off. The medical examiner had just left to get his instruments. But I breathed. Then I coughed. Then I opened my eyes. The pain was intense, not physical, but existential. It was as if every cell had to relearn what it meant to be alive. Every heartbeat was a hammering in my chest. Every movement a miracle that shouldn't be happening. I tried to speak, but all I could manage was a whisper. Jesus. The nurses stared at me as if they were seeing a ghost. One doctor, his hands shaking, took my pulse. Another checked my vital signs, dazed. "This is impossible," he repeated. "It just doesn't happen." But it was happening, and I knew why. I hadn't come back to life by chance. It wasn't a medical error. It wasn't a misdiagnosis. It wasn't luck. It was grace. Scandalous grace. Impossible. Supernatural. God took me out of the abyss. He snatched me from the darkness. He gave me back my breath, not to remain the same, but to start over. The next few days were a whirlwind. Reporters, family members crying, the entire church in shock. Some said it was a miracle. Others thought it was a mistake. Some doubted it. Some regretted having doubted it. But no one could deny one thing. I was dead. And now, I was alive. Don't just live in the body, but it awakens in the soul. I didn't just come back with a new chance at life. I came back with a mission, and she was about to begin. Coming back to life was just the first miracle. The second was to allow everything inside me to die and be born again. In the days that followed, still weakened, lying in a hospital bed, I felt the Spirit of God visit me, not with shouts or thunder, but with a powerful silence that said to me, "Now, yes, you are ready to listen to me." And I heard. I listened like I had never heard before. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to control God. I wasn't negotiating for blessings or trying to earn something. I just wanted to be with him. And that's when the real transformation began. I asked my children for forgiveness, not just for my obvious failings as a mother, but for failing to mirror Christ's love in my home, for demanding religious perfection from them, but rarely showing them compassion. I called church members with whom I had disagreements. I asked for forgiveness for judgments that I never verbalized, but that I carried in my eyes. I found old friends that I had abandoned because they did not fit my standard of holy living, and I said to them, I was wrong. I began to pray for real, not to impress, not with long sentences, but with sincerity. I began to seek God in silence, in my room, in secret, and there, in that hidden place, I found a love that I had never felt before, even after decades of church. My Bible, once used as a theological arsenal, became a love letter. Each page seemed to breathe. Verses I had been reading for years now burned like living fire. In church, I no longer went up to the pulpit, not out of shame, but because I understood that it was no longer the time to speak. It was the time to serve, to listen, to wash the feet of others with true humility. I abandoned spiritual pride, social networks with ready-made phrases, discussions without compassion, performative Christianity, and instead, I began to live the gospel with simplicity. I brought soup to the homeless without posting a picture. I sat with a pregnant teenager who had been rejected by her family. I hugged a man who had been ostracized by the church, not to gain points with God, but because now the heart of Jesus was in me. And with that came peace. A peace that did not depend on position, nor on praise, nor on recognition. The peace of knowing that if I died again, I would be ready. Because after all, he knew me. At first, I didn't want to tell. The experience I had was too intimate, too sacred, too painful to be shared. But the more I kept quiet, the more I felt that silence was disobedience. Not to a religion, not to a church, but to Jesus himself. So, I spoke, first in a low voice, in a small prayer circle, then in a church meeting where almost no one could hold back the tears, and finally, in front of a camera. My grandson helped me record. He placed a simple cell phone on top of the bookshelf in the living room. I looked into the lens and said, "My name is Margaret Louise Bennett. I died. I went to the afterlife. And Jesus said to me, I never knew you." I didn't need to shout or dramatize. I just shared with an open heart everything I had experienced. My hypocrisy, my religious facade, the fall into the abyss, the desperate prayer, and the grace that brought me back. We posted the video. That night, I slept without imagining what was about to happen. In less than 24 hours, hundreds of thousands of views, comments from all over the United States, people crying, confessing sins, saying, "This story woke me up. I am just like you were, Margaret. I need to change." And then the invitations came. Small churches, poor communities, conferences, even Christian TV shows. Everyone wanted to hear the woman who came back from the dead with a message from heaven. But I refused the stage. I didn't want fame. I didn't want the spotlight. I only agreed to go where God told me. There's someone who needs to find me. I began to preach, but now, not to convince, just to share. Because the gospel is not an argument. It is a living experience. It is the cross. It is surrender. And in every place I went, I repeated a question that had been echoing since that encounter with Jesus. Do you know Jesus, or do you only know things about him? This question cut deep, because many, like me, knew how to sing, knew how to preach, knew how to teach, but had never surrendered. I saw men let go of their pride, women abandon their masks, young people throw themselves to the ground in sincere tears, families reconcile, churches shed their vanity, all because a true story touched where no theology could reach, in the broken spirit. And I understood. My fall served so that others would not have to fall so deep. My mistake became a bridge. My shame turned into a seed, and my testimony became a warning. The message Jesus gave me was not just for me. It was for the world. The years passed. The Margaret who had once lived for applause now lived to serve in silence. Nothing in me desired recognition. I just wanted to remain faithful, not to earn heaven, but because now I knew him, and that was enough. My health, although fragile since that day in the morgue, has remained stable for more than 10 years. Enough to touch thousands of lives, see my grandchildren grow up, reconcile old stories, and live lightly, without fear of death. And then, one Sunday morning, she came back. That same feeling I felt years ago, a warmth in my soul, a gentle breeze. But this time there was no pain. There was no falling. There was peace. I put on a simple white dress and went to church. Not to speak, not to sing, just to be there, as another grateful daughter among brothers. The service was beautiful, simple, true. During the worship, I closed my eyes, raised my hands, and felt that he was close, very close. It was then that I whispered, "Now, Lord, I am ready." My heart slowed, my breathing stopped, and before anyone around me realized it, I was no longer there. But this time, there was no falling. There was ascension. The light came, but not as a shock. It came as an embrace. Jesus was there, and when I looked into his eyes, he smiled. A whole, pure smile, full of recognition. And he said, "Now yes, I know you." The sky opened up, and the sweetest sound enveloped me. It wasn't music. It was something deeper. It was the sound of eternity welcoming back a soul that had finally surrendered. This time, I didn't have to beg. This time, I was his. And while my story ended on earth, a new one began on the other side. A story without chapters, without time, without end. But my question to you, who have come this far, is simple and eternal. If today were your last service, would Jesus know you? If this story spoke to you in any way, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any more messages like this. If you made it to the end, comment below. Now I want to be known by Jesus. This shows that you understood everything. And of course, leave your like so that this message can reach even more lives. Now click on the next video that is appearing on your screen, because God still wants to continue speaking to you.